In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where civilized worlds refuse to look, there exists a market where sentient beings are traded like livestock, where desperate creatures sell their own kind for nothing more than a bottle of synthetic alcohol, where hope dies slowly in cramped cargo holds, and freedom becomes just a memory whispered between the condemned. But sometimes, in the most unlikely places, salvation wears an unexpected face. Sometimes it takes a species that the galaxy considers primitive, violent, and worthless to remind the universe what compassion truly means. Sometimes it takes a human to prove that even in the depths of despair, the light of hope can never truly be extinguished. This is the story of what happens when the galaxy's most underestimated species encounters its most forgotten victims. When human hands reach out to lift up those who have fallen through the cracks of civilization. When the very traits that make humanity seem barbaric to the sophisticated galaxy become the keys to unlocking freedom for the enslaved. Welcome to a universe where being sold for a drink becomes the first step toward discovering that some things in the galaxy are worth far more than any price tag could ever indicate. The stench of desperation hung thick in the air of Gamma Station's lower levels, mixing with the acrid smoke from cheap stimulant burners and the metallic tang of recycled atmosphere. Captain Marcus Chun pulled his worn jacket tighter as he navigated through the maze of makeshift stalls and shadowy alcoves that made up the station's black market district. His weathered hands stayed loose at his sides, ready but not threatening, as his sharp brown eyes took in every detail of his surroundings. Marcus had seen plenty of rough places during his 15 years hauling cargo through the Outer Rim territories. Places where the Galactic Council's laws were more suggestions than rules, where might made right, and credits talked louder than justice. But, even by those standards, Gamma Station pushed the boundaries of civilized behavior. It existed in the gray space between sectors, technically outside any single species' jurisdiction, which made it a haven for those who preferred to conduct their business away from prying eyes. He was here on a simple job. Pick up a shipment of rare minerals from a Zalithian trader named Vextar, transport them to the mining colonies in the Kepler system, collect his payment, and move on to the next job. Simple, clean, and profitable enough to keep his ship, the Wandering Star, fueled and flying for another few months. At 42 years old, Marcus had learned to appreciate simple jobs. They paid the bills and kept him from having to make the kind of moral compromises that had driven him to the Outer Rim in the first place. The meeting point was a cantina called the Fractured Comet, squeezed between a weapons dealer and what appeared to be a clinic offering questionable medical procedures. The establishment's holographic sign flickered intermittently, casting erratic blue light across the faces of the various species that called Gamma Station home. Marcus pushed through the heavy blast doors and immediately regretted it. The cantina was a symphony of alien sounds and smells that assaulted his human senses. Conversations in a dozen different languages created a constant buzz of noise, punctuated by the occasional mechanical whir of translation devices and the clink of glasses filled with substances that would probably dissolve human stomach lining. The lighting was deliberately dim, shadows dancing across tables where beings of various shapes and sizes conducted business that wouldn't bear scrutiny in brighter surroundings. Marcus spotted Vextar immediately. The Zalithian trader was hard to miss, standing nearly 3 meters tall with the characteristic blue-green scales and elongated skull of his species. He sat at a corner table, his massive frame making the reinforced furniture look fragile. Across from him sat a smaller figure that Marcus initially dismissed as another trader, but, as he approached, he began to make out more details that made his blood run cold. The smaller being was clearly distressed. Their posture spoke of defeat and desperation, shoulders slumped in a way that transcended species barriers. They wore simple clothing that had seen better days, and their hands shook slightly as they held what appeared to be some kind of electronic tablet. Marcus couldn't immediately identify their species, but something about their obvious distress triggered an instinctive protective response that he tried to suppress. "Ah, Captain Chun," Vextar's voice rumbled through his translator, the electronic tones unable to completely mask the predatory satisfaction in his words. "You arrive at a most fortuitous moment. Please sit." Marcus took the offered chair, his eyes still drawn to the smaller being. Up close, he could see that they appeared to be from a species he wasn't familiar with, humanoid, but with distinctly non-human features. Their skin had a subtle golden hue, and their large eyes held an intelligence that seemed at odds with their current circumstances. Those eyes were also filled with a resignation that made Marcus's chest tighten with anger he couldn't quite explain. "I trust you are prepared to collect the mineral shipment?" Vextar continued, apparently oblivious to Marcus's growing discomfort. "The cargo is already loaded and waiting in Bay 94. However, there has been a slight change to our arrangement." Marcus forced himself to look away from the distressed being and focus on the trader. "What kind of change? Our agreement was pretty straightforward." Vextar's scaled lips pulled back in what might have been a smile on his species. "Nothing too significant. I find myself in need of transport for an additional item. Consider it a bonus cargo, for which I am prepared to increase your payment by 20%. The offer was generous, suspiciously so. Marcus had been in the freight business long enough to know that when a deal sounded too good to be true, it usually was. "What kind of additional item?" Instead of answering directly, Vextar gestured toward the smaller being. "This is Kira of the Etherian people. Due to certain financial obligations that have come due, ownership of Kira has passed to me. I require transport to deliver her to her new employer in the Vega system." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Slavery. The bastard was talking about slavery. Marcus had heard rumors that such practices still existed in the darker corners of the galaxy, but he had never been confronted with it so directly. His hands clenched into fists under the table as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I don't transport people," Marcus said carefully, his voice tight with controlled anger. "My ship isn't equipped for passengers." Vextar waved a dismissive hand. "Kira requires no special accommodations. A simple cargo hold will suffice. She is quite manageable and will cause no trouble during transport." Marcus forced himself to look at Kira again. The Etherian was staring down at the table, but he could see her slight frame trembling. She was terrified and trying desperately to hide it. The protective instinct that Marcus had been fighting roared to life, drowning out the cautious voice in his head that warned him not to get involved. "What were these financial obligations?" he asked, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. Vextar shrugged, a gesture that looked strange on his massive frame. "Kira's guardian accumulated significant gambling debts. When he was unable to pay, certain accommodations had to be made. The debt has been transferred to me, along with ownership of his ward. It is quite legal under the laws of this station." The casual way the Zalithian discussed a person as property made Marcus's stomach turn. He glanced around the cantina, noting the way other patrons seemed deliberately oblivious to the conversation taking place. This was normal here. Just another business transaction in a place where people could be bought and sold like cargo. "And if I refuse the additional cargo?" Marcus asked. "Then, I suppose I will have to find another shipper for the minerals as well," Vextar replied smoothly. "The Hendrik Mining Consortium has several other freight captains on retainer. I am sure one of them would be happy to handle both shipments." The threat was clear. Take the job as modified, or lose it entirely. Marcus needed the money, and they both knew it. Independent freight haulers were struggling throughout the outer rim as larger corporations consolidated shipping routes. Turning down a job this size would set him back months. But, as he looked at Kira again, Marcus realized that some things were more important than money. The Etherian finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. Her eyes were a striking amber color, and in them he saw not just fear, but a desperate hope that someone, anyone, might help her. It was a look he recognized from his own past, from a time when he had been the one hoping for rescue that never came. "I need to think about it," Marcus said finally. Vextar's expression darkened. "There is nothing to think about, Captain. This is a simple business transaction. You transport cargo from point A to point B and collect your payment. The nature of the cargo should not concern you." Marcus stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing as he moved. "You're right about one thing. This is about cargo, and I don't transport cargo that can think and feel and suffer." He pulled out a credit chip and tossed it on the table. "That should cover Kira's debt and give you enough left over for that drink you seem to need so badly." The cantina went quiet. Other patrons turned to stare at the human who had just done something unprecedented in their experience. Vextar looked down at the credit chip in shock, then back up at Marcus with an expression of pure bewilderment. "You cannot be serious," the Zilithian said. "That chip contains more credits than this creature is worth. You do not even know her species." Marcus reached out his hand to Kira, who stared at it in amazement. "I know enough. I know she's scared and alone and needs help. Sometimes that's all you need to know." Kira looked from Marcus to Vextar and back again, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took Marcus's offered hand. Her fingers were warm and surprisingly strong, and he could feel her trembling as she stood. "This is madness," Vextar sputtered. "You have no idea what you are doing. Etherians are notoriously difficult to manage. She will cause you nothing but trouble." Marcus helped Kira to her feet, noting how she stayed close to his side, as if afraid he might change his mind. "Then, I guess it's a good thing I'm not trying to manage her. Come on, Kira. Let's get you somewhere safe." As they moved toward the cantina's exit, Marcus could hear Vextar shouting behind them, something about human stupidity and wasted opportunities. He ignored the traitors' protests, focusing instead on guiding Kira through the crowd of staring aliens. Some looked at him with confusion, others with what might have been respect, but most seemed simply baffled by his actions. They made it to the upper levels of the station before Kira finally spoke. Her voice was soft and melodious, with an accent that Marcus couldn't place. "You did not have to do that. I am nothing to you." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. In the better lighting of the upper levels, he could see that she was younger than he had initially thought, probably equivalent to a human in her early 20s. Her golden skin had an almost luminescent quality, and her amber eyes held depths that suggested an intelligence far beyond her apparent years. "You're wrong about that," Marcus said gently. "You're a person. That makes you something to me, even if I don't know your name or your story. No one should be sold like a piece of equipment." Kira stared at him with an expression that was part wonder, part disbelief. "But you used so many credits. That chip contained enough to purchase a small spacecraft. Why would you spend so much on a stranger?" Marcus resumed walking, matching his pace to hers as they headed toward the docking bay where his ship waited. "Because some things are more important than money. Because everyone deserves a chance to choose their own path. Because—" he paused, struggling to put his feelings into words. "Because a long time ago, I was in a bad situation and no one helped. I swore that if I ever had the chance to be different, I would take it." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, making their way through the station's maze of corridors and transit tubes. Marcus found himself stealing glances at his unexpected companion, trying to understand what had driven him to such an impulsive act. He had always been practical, careful with his money and his commitments. But something about Kira's situation had bypassed all his rational defenses and spoken directly to his conscience. As they approached docking bay 47, where the wandering star waited, Kira spoke again. "Where will you take me? I have no home to return to, no family to claim me." Vextar spoke truth when he said my guardian sold me for his debts. Marcus keyed in his access code and waited for the bay doors to open. "I don't know yet. That's something we'll have to figure out together. But I can promise you this much, you'll never be sold again. Not as long as I have anything to say about it." The wandering star sat in the middle of the docking bay, her hull scarred by years of service, but her lines still graceful. She was a modified cargo hauler, built for reliability rather than speed or luxury, but Marcus had made enough modifications over the years to turn her into a comfortable home. As they approached the ship's ramp, he realized that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. But as he looked at the hope beginning to shine in Kira's amber eyes, he also realized that it might just have become infinitely more meaningful as well. The galaxy was a harsh place, especially for those who couldn't defend themselves. But maybe, just maybe, there was room for a little kindness among the stars. The ramp lowered with a soft hiss of hydraulics, revealing the warm lighting of the ship's interior. Marcus gestured for Kira to go first, then followed her aboard his ship, knowing that nothing would ever be quite the same again. Behind them, Gamma Station continued its indifferent rotation through space, its black markets and shadowy deals proceeding as if nothing had changed. The wandering star hummed through hyperspace, her engines maintaining the steady rhythm that had lulled Marcus to sleep countless times over the years. But, tonight, sleep eluded him as he sat in the pilot's chair, staring out at the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel. 3 days had passed since they left Gamma Station, and he was still trying to process what he had done and why. Kira had been quiet for most of the journey, spending her time exploring the ship with the careful hesitation of someone afraid to overstep boundaries. Marcus had given her the small passenger cabin that he normally used for storage, clearing out boxes of spare parts and old data tablets to make space. She had accepted the gesture with a gratitude that made his chest ache, as if basic courtesy was something she had never expected to receive. The ship's intercom crackled to life, interrupting his brooding. "Captain Chun, I hope I am not disturbing you." Kira's voice was soft, almost apologetic. Marcus keyed the response. "Not at all. Can't sleep either. I am unaccustomed to the sensation of hyperspace travel. May I join you in the cockpit?" "Of course." Doors unlocked. Kira appeared a few moments later, moving with the fluid grace that seemed natural to her species. She wore one of Marcus's spare jumpsuits, which was far too large for her slight frame, but at least provided proper coverage. Her golden skin seemed to have a subtle luminescence in the dim lighting of the cockpit, and her amber eyes reflected the swirling colors of hyperspace. "It is beautiful," she said softly, settling into the co-pilot's chair. "I have never traveled beyond my home system before." Marcus turned to look at her. "Tell me about your home. What's it like?" Kira was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the hypnotic patterns outside. Etheria is a water world, with floating cities connected by graceful bridges. The architecture follows the natural flow of wind and current, and the buildings seem to grow from the sea itself rather than being imposed upon it. It is a place of great beauty and ancient wisdom. Her voice carried a note of loss that made Marcus's protective instincts stir again. "It sounds amazing. What happened? How did you end up so far from home?" The question seemed to pain her, and Marcus immediately regretted asking. But, after another long pause, Kira began to speak, her words coming slowly as if she were pulling each one from a deep well of memory. "My parents were scholars, researchers studying ancient technologies found in the deepest parts of our oceans. When I was young, they discovered something that changed everything. A device of unknown origin, clearly not of Etherian make, but incredibly advanced. They brought it to the surface for study." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "What kind of device?" "We called it a memory crystal, though that name hardly does justice to its true nature. It contained vast amounts of information about civilizations that had existed long before any of our current spacefaring races. Technologies, philosophies, warnings about dangers that lurk in the dark spaces between stars. My parents spent years trying to decode its secrets." Kira's hands moved unconsciously to a pendant at her throat, a small crystal that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Marcus had noticed it before but assumed it was simple jewelry. The knowledge they uncovered was extraordinary but also dangerous. There were those among our people who believed such ancient secrets should remain buried. Others thought the information should be shared freely with all sentient species. The debate tore our society apart. The pain in her voice was unmistakable now, and Marcus found himself reaching out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, instead seeming to draw strength from the contact. "In the end, my parents chose to leave Etheria rather than see our people destroy themselves over the crystal's secrets. They took me and fled to the Outer Rim, hoping to find a place where they could continue their research in peace. But peaceful places are rare in these territories, and my parents, they were scholars, not fighters. They did not understand how dangerous the Outer Rim could be." Marcus could guess where this story was leading, and his heart ached for the young woman beside him. "What happened to them?" "Pirates," Kira said simply. 3 years ago, our research station was attacked. My parents hid me in an escape pod with the crystal and told me to run. I was found drifting in space by a salvage crew and taken to a refugee camp on Epsilon Prime. That is where I met Jorik." "Your guardian?" "He claimed to be a friend of my parents, said he would take care of me until I came of age. I was alone and afraid, and I wanted to believe him. For a while, it was not so bad. Jorik had a small trading post, and I helped him with the books and inventory. But then, he discovered what I carried. Kira's hand moved to the crystal pendant again, and Marcus noticed for the first time how it seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The memory crystal? Jorik became obsessed with its potential value. He spent months trying to find buyers, making contact with collectors and researchers throughout the galaxy. But the more he learned about its worth, the deeper he sank into gambling and drink, convinced that one big score would make him rich beyond imagination. Marcus was beginning to understand the full scope of the tragedy that had led to their meeting. And when his luck ran out, he owed debts to some very dangerous people. They gave him a choice: pay what he owed or forfeit his life. When he could not pay in credits, they offered an alternative. Me. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He sold me to cover his gambling debts, and I was to be transported to a pleasure house in the Vegas system. The casual brutality of it took Marcus's breath away. The idea that someone could sell another person to cover gambling debts, that there were institutions that would buy sentient beings for such purposes, made him sick to his stomach. But it also explained the depths of terror and resignation he had seen in Kira's eyes back at the cantina. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate, but needing to say them anyway. No one should have to go through that. Kira had turned to look at him, and he was surprised to see not self-pity in her eyes, but a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. "You saved me from that fate, Marcus-chun. You spent more credits than most beings see in a lifetime to free a stranger." What? It was the same question she had asked before, and one that Marcus had been avoiding answering honestly, even to himself. He looked out at the hypnotic swirl of hyperspace, gathering his thoughts. "When I was younger," he began slowly, "I served in the Terran Defense Force. I was a good soldier, followed orders, believed in the cause. But there was an incident, a mission that went wrong. We were supposed to evacuate civilians from a research station that was under attack. But our commanders decided the research data was more valuable than the lives of the people who had developed it." Marcus's hands clenched as the memories surfaced. "They ordered us to secure the computers and abandon the civilians. I tried to protest, tried to convince my CO that we could save both the people and the data. But orders were orders, and I was just a sergeant. We left 200 people to die because their research was classified as strategically valuable." Kira listened without judgment, her amber eyes reflecting the pain in his voice. "I got out of the service after that, swore I'd never again follow orders that valued things over people. But for years, I told myself I was different now, that I'd learned my lesson. The truth is, I was still choosing the easy path, taking jobs that paid well, and not asking too many questions about what I was hauling or for whom." Marcus turned to meet Kira's gaze directly. "When I saw you in that cantina, saw the fear in your eyes, and the casual way Vextar discussed selling you like cargo, I realized I was facing the same choice I'd faced all those years ago. I could take the easy money and look the other way, or I could actually live up to the person I claimed to be. And you chose me," Kira said softly. "I chose to do the right thing for once in my life," Marcus corrected. "The fact that it meant helping you was just, well, it was the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cosmic light show outside the viewport. Marcus found himself studying Kira's profile, noting the subtle differences in her bone structure and the way her skin seemed to have an inner radiance. Her species was obviously adapted to an aquatic environment, but there was something else about her, something that suggested hidden depths. "The crystal you carry," he said eventually. "Is it really that valuable?" Kira's hand moved to the pendant again, and this time Marcus could see the way it pulsed more brightly at her touch. In the right hands, it could revolutionize understanding of galactic history and technology. But it could also be incredibly dangerous if misused. The civilizations that created it left warnings about powers that should not be awakened. What kind of powers? Kira hesitated, as if debating how much to reveal. The crystal contains information about something called the Architects, a race that existed millions of years ago and built structures throughout the galaxy before disappearing. But, according to the records, they did not simply die out or evolve beyond physical existence. They were destroyed by something they awakened, something that still exists in the dark spaces between galaxies. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. And this crystal contains information about this threat. Among other things, yes. It is both a library and a warning containing technologies that could advance any civilization by thousands of years, but also records of what happened to those who used them unwisely. Kira removed the pendant and held it out to him. My parents died trying to understand its secrets. Perhaps it is time someone else tried. Marcus stared at the crystal, noting how it seemed to pulse with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Up close, he could see that it wasn't a simple gem, but a complex structure with intricate internal patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid light. As he reached out to touch it, he could swear he felt a subtle warmth emanating from its surface. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This sounds like the kind of knowledge that powerful people kill for." Kira smiled sadly. "Powerful people have already killed for it. My parents are dead. Jorik is probably dead by now as well, and I was sold into slavery because of it. The question is not whether it is dangerous to possess this knowledge, but whether it is more dangerous to ignore it." Marcus carefully took the crystal from her hands, surprised by how warm it felt against his palm. The moment his skin made contact with its surface, images flashed through his mind. Vast structures floating in space, civilizations rising and falling across millions of years, and something dark and hungry moving between the stars. The visions lasted only a moment, but they left him shaken. "Did you see it too?" Kira asked, studying his face. "Flashes of something. Images that didn't make sense." Marcus handed the crystal back to her, noting how the visions faded as soon as he lost contact. "How much of that information have you been able to access?" "Very little on my own. The crystal requires specific genetic markers to fully interface with markers that my species possesses, but most others do not. My parents spent years learning to interpret its contents, and even then, they had only scratched the surface." Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. "So you're carrying around a device that contains the accumulated knowledge of an ancient super-civilization, information that could revolutionize galactic society or potentially doom it, and you're the only one who can fully access it." "In simple terms, yes. No wonder people were willing to kill for it." Kira nodded gravely. "Which is why I must be very careful about who I trust with this knowledge. If it falls into the wrong hands." "But you're trusting me with it now," Marcus pointed out. "You spent a fortune to free a stranger from slavery," Kira replied. "You offered shelter to someone you had never met simply because they needed help. I think that demonstrates a moral character that can be trusted with dangerous knowledge." Marcus wasn't sure he agreed with her assessment of his character, but he appreciated the faith she was showing in him. "What do you want to do with it?" "The crystal, I mean. You can't spend the rest of your life running from people who want to exploit it." "I have been thinking about that," Kira said, settling back into her chair. "My parents believe the knowledge should be shared, but carefully, with beings who could use it to help rather than exploit. Perhaps it is time to find such beings. Any ideas where we might find them?" Kira was quiet for a moment, then turned to him with a look of determination that hadn't been there before. "There is a place my parents spoke of, a research station operated by a coalition of species dedicated to preserving ancient knowledge. They call themselves the Keepers, and they maintain a facility in the Andromeda Research Zone. If anyone could be trusted with the crystal's secrets, it would be them." Marcus nodded slowly. The Andromeda Research Zone was deep in the outer rim, several weeks' travel from their current position. It was also notoriously dangerous territory, full of pirates, rogue AI systems, and worse things that lurked in the dark between stars. But if Kira was right about the crystal's importance, it might be worth the risk. "It won't be an easy journey," he warned. "The Andromeda Zone is rough territory, and we'll be traveling through areas where the Galactic Council has no authority." "I understand the risks," Kira said, "but I also understand the cost of doing nothing. This knowledge has already cost too many lives. Perhaps it is time to ensure those deaths meant something." Marcus looked at her with new respect. The frightened, broken young woman he had rescued from Gamma Station was gone, replaced by someone who understood the magnitude of what she carried and was willing to face the dangers necessary to use it responsibly. It was a transformation that spoke to inner strength he was only beginning to understand. All right, he said, reaching for the navigation controls. Let's change course for the Andromeda Zone. But we're going to need supplies and information before we head into that territory. I know a place where we can get both without asking too many questions. As Marcus began plotting their new course, he realized that what had started as a simple act of compassion was evolving into something much larger. He had thought he was just saving one person from a terrible fate, but it seemed he might actually be playing a part in something that could affect the entire galaxy. The wandering star adjusted course, her hull humming with the wandering star dropped out of hyperspace in the shadow of Meridian Station, a sprawling commercial hub that straddled the border between civilized space and the lawless outer rim. Unlike Gamma Station's cramped and predatory atmosphere, Meridian was a legitimate trading post where information flowed as freely as credits, and where a careful captain could learn what he needed to know without attracting unwanted attention. Marcus guided his ship through the approach traffic, noting the mix of vessels that filled the space around the station. Corporate haulers rubbed shoulders with independent traders, while sleek diplomatic vessels maintained careful distance from the more questionable craft that frequented these waters. It was exactly the kind of diverse environment where two fugitives could disappear while gathering intelligence. "Stay close to me while we're aboard," Marcus told Kira as they prepared to disembark. "Meridian is safer than Gamma Station, but there are still people here who wouldn't hesitate to turn us in if they thought there was profit in it." Kira nodded, adjusting the hood of her cloak to better conceal her distinctive features. The memory crystal hung beneath her shirt, its subtle pulse hidden but ever present. Over the past week of travel, Marcus had begun to notice how the artifact seemed to affect her. She was more alert now, more aware of her surroundings, as if the crystal was somehow enhancing her natural abilities. They made their way through the station's main commercial district, past vendors hawking everything from exotic foods to military-grade weaponry. Marcus led them to a small establishment called the Information Broker, a neutral ground where knowledge was traded with the same casual efficiency as any other commodity. The proprietor was a Zentarian named Chitao, a spider-like being whose multiple eyes missed nothing, and whose information network stretched across half the galaxy. Marcus had done business with them before, and knew that Chitao's discretion was absolute as long as the credits flowed. "Captain Chun." Chitao's mechanical voice greeted them as they entered the dimly lit establishment. "It has been some time since you graced my humble establishment. What brings you to Meridian?" "Information, as usual," Marcus replied, settling into one of the chairs designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. "I need to know about the current situation in the Andromeda Research Zone." Chitao's primary eyes focused on him, while several secondary ones tracked Kira's movement to her own chair. "The Andromeda Zone? That is dangerous territory, Captain. The kind of place where ships disappear without sending distress signals. What could possibly draw you to such a place?" "Let's just say I'm interested in the research opportunities," Marcus said carefully. If Chitao noticed the evasion, they gave no sign. Instead, they activated a privacy field that would prevent their conversation from being overheard. "The zone has become increasingly unstable in recent months. Several research expeditions have failed to return, and those that do come back report strange phenomena. Equipment failures, navigation anomalies, and what some describe as whispers in the void." Kira leaned forward at this, her amber eyes bright with interest. "What kind of whispers?" "The survivors are reluctant to discuss specifics," Chitao replied, their attention shifting to her for the first time. "But there are rumors of something awakening in the deep spaces, something that does not appreciate intrusion." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered the visions he had experienced when touching the memory crystal. Are the Keepers still operating their station in that region? The Keepers maintain their facility, yes, but access has become severely restricted. They are no longer accepting casual visitors or research partnerships. Only those with the highest credentials and most urgent need are granted passage to their station. This was worse than Marcus had hoped. If the Keepers had locked down their operation, convincing them to examine the crystal would be nearly impossible through normal channels. But then, again, nothing about their situation had been normal from the beginning. "How urgent a need?" Marcus asked. Chitao's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. the kind that comes with artifacts of ancient origin and the genetic markers necessary to interface with them. Marcus tried to keep his expression neutral, but he could see from Chital's posture that the information broker had already deduced more than was comfortable. That's awfully specific. Information is my business, Captain Chun. And, lately, the most valuable information has concerned rumors of a memory crystal from the ancient civilization known as the Architects. Such an artifact would be incredibly valuable to researchers like the Keepers, particularly if it came with someone capable of accessing its contents. Kira's hand moved unconsciously toward her hidden pendant, and Marcus saw Chital's eyes track the movement. The information broker was too skilled to miss such obvious tells. Hypothetically speaking, Marcus said carefully, if someone possessed such an artifact, what would be the safest way to reach the Keepers? Hypothetically, they would need to avoid the normal shipping routes, which have become increasingly dangerous. Pirates have been targeting vessels headed for the zone, apparently acting on information that something valuable is moving through those channels. Chital paused, their multiple eyes focusing intently on both Marcus and Kira. They would also need to be very careful about who they trust with knowledge of their cargo. The warning was clear. Word of the crystal was already spreading through the underworld, which meant their window of safety was rapidly closing. Marcus made a mental note to vary their route and avoid predictable stops. What about escort services? Marcus asked. Anyone reliable operating in that region? There is one possibility, Chital said slowly. A group calling themselves the Free Traders Alliance has been organizing convoy protection for independent haulers. They operate outside normal commercial channels, but their reputation for honor is good. Their next convoy departs from Haven Station in 4 days. Marcus had heard of the Free Traders Alliance, though he had never worked with them directly. They were a loose confederation of independent captains who banded together for mutual protection and profit. It sounded like exactly what they needed. How do I contact them? Chital provided the necessary information while Marcus transferred the agreed-upon payment for the intelligence. As they prepared to leave, the information broker spoke again, their voice carrying an unusual note of concern. Captain Chun, a word of advice from one professional to another. The crystal you carry is not the only artifact from the Architects that has surfaced recently. There are others moving through the black market, and their appearance has attracted attention from forces that prefer such knowledge to remain buried. Be very careful who you trust, and remember that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those who claim to want to help. The warning followed them as they left the information broker and made their way back toward the docking bay. Marcus found himself scanning the crowds more carefully, looking for signs that they were being watched. The station's security cameras tracked their movement with mechanical efficiency, and he wondered how many other eyes might be following their progress. We should contact this alliance, Kira said quietly as they walked. If there really are other artifacts surfacing, the Keepers will need to know about it. Marcus nodded, but his attention was caught by something else. Among the crowd of beings moving through the commercial district, he spotted a familiar figure. Vextar, the Zalithian trader from Gamma Station, was standing near a communications booth, his massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. We need to get back to the ship, Marcus said urgently, taking Kira's arm. Now. She followed his gaze and tensed as she recognized the trader who had tried to sell her. How did he find us? Questions for later. Right now we need to move. They quickened their pace, trying to blend with the crowd while making their way toward the docking bays. But, as they turned a corner, Marcus saw 2 more familiar figures blocking their path. Mercenaries, by their look, armed and professional. The trap was well planned and efficiently executed. This way, Marcus whispered, pulling Kira into a side corridor that led toward the station's maintenance sections. Behind them, he could hear the heavy footsteps of pursuit. Vextar was apparently not content to let them disappear with what he probably saw as a fortune in lost opportunity. The trader had somehow tracked them to Meridian and brought backup to ensure a different outcome this time. The maintenance corridors were dimly lit and filled with the hum of life support systems. Marcus led them through a maze of pipes and conduits, using his knowledge of station layouts to stay ahead of their pursuers. But he could hear the sounds of organized searching behind them, suggesting that Vextar had brought more than just a few mercenaries. There. Kira pointed to an access hatch that led to the station's outer hull. Can we reach your ship that way? Marcus examined the hatch and the maintenance tunnel beyond it. It would be dangerous and uncomfortable, but it might get them to the docking bay without using the main corridors. It's worth a try. They squeezed through the narrow tunnel, following the curve of the station's hull as artificial gravity shifted and changed around them. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the metal walls, and the constant vibration of the station's rotation made every step precarious. Behind them, Marcus could hear their pursuers entering the tunnel system. Vextar's voice echoed through the conduits, speaking in his native language, but clearly coordinating a search pattern. They had perhaps minutes before being cornered. Marcus, Kira's voice was tight with strain. The crystal is responding to something. I can feel it pulling in a specific direction. Marcus looked back at her, noting how the subtle luminescence of her skin had increased. Pulling toward what? I'm not sure, but it feels familiar, like it recognizes something nearby. They reached a junction in the tunnel system, and Marcus paused to check their position using the maintenance markers on the walls. They were close to the docking bay, but still had several hundred meters to cover. The crystal is getting stronger, Kira whispered urgently. There's definitely something else here, something connected to the architects. Marcus felt a chill of realization. Another artifact? Yes, but different from mine. Older, more powerful. Kira closed her eyes, apparently focusing on the sensations the crystal was providing. It's in the station's central core, heavily shielded, but definitely active. The implications were staggering. If there really was another architect artifact hidden somewhere in Meridian Station, it would explain why Vextar had been able to track them so efficiently. It might also mean that their situation was far more dangerous than they had realized. We need to get to the ship, Marcus said firmly. Whatever's happening here, we can't handle it on our own. They continued through the maintenance tunnels, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Marcus could hear more voices now, suggesting that Vextar had brought a significant force. The traitor was apparently taking no chances this time. They finally reached the access point near docking bay 47. But, as they prepared to exit the tunnel system, Marcus heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging. Their pursuers had anticipated this route and positioned themselves accordingly. Stay back, Marcus whispered to Kira, drawing his sidearm. When I say run, head for the ship as fast as you can. But, before he could implement his hasty plan, the station's lights flickered and an alarm began to sound. Emergency broadcasts echoed through the corridors, announcing a containment breach in the central core. Whatever artifact Kira had sensed was apparently doing more than just hiding in the shadows. In the confusion that followed, Marcus saw their chance. The mercenaries blocking their path were distracted by the alarms and the sudden surge of station security forces moving toward the central core. He grabbed Kira's hand and made a run for the docking bay. They burst out of the maintenance tunnel and sprinted across the open space toward the wandering star. Energy bolts sizzled past them as the mercenaries recovered from their surprise, but the ongoing emergency made accurate shooting difficult. Marcus slapped his hand on the ship's access panel and hauled Kira up the ramp as it began to lower. Get us clearance for immediate departure, he shouted to the ship's automated systems as they reached the bridge. Clearance granted due to emergency conditions. The station's traffic control responded with unusual efficiency. All ships are ordered to maintain minimum safe distance until containment is re-established. The wandering star lifted off from Meridian Station as chaos spread through its corridors. Through the viewports, Marcus could see emergency vehicles racing toward the central core while security teams cordoned off entire sections. Whatever the other artifact was, its activation had thrown the entire station into crisis. Are you all right? Marcus asked Kira as they reached a safe distance from the station. She nodded, but her face was pale and her hands were shaking. The crystal is still responding. Whatever happened back there, it's not over. Marcus checked their sensors as they jumped to hyperspace, noting several ships following them at a discreet distance. Vextar might have lost them for the moment, but their problems were far from resolved. Tell me about what you sensed, Marcus said once they were safely in hyperspace. How could there be another architect artifact on a commercial station? Kira removed her pendant and held it up to the light. noting how it pulsed with increased intensity. The architects placed their devices throughout the galaxy before they disappeared. Most are hidden, dormant until activated by specific conditions. But some were placed in locations where they could observe and record the development of younger civilizations. A spy network? More like a warning system. The crystal contains references to monitoring stations that would alert the galaxy if certain dangerous thresholds were crossed. Kira's expression was troubled. I think what we sensed on Meridian was one of those monitoring stations activating. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Activating because of what? Because other architect artifacts are being discovered and misused. The network is waking up, trying to assess whether the ancient threat they were built to watch for has returned. The scope of what they had stumbled into was becoming clearer, and Haven Station materialized on the Wandering Star's view screen like a beacon of hope in the hostile void of the Outer Rim. Unlike the cramped commercial hub of Meridian or the predatory darkness of Gamma Station, Haven was a carefully designed neutral ground where independent traders could gather without fear of corporate interference or government oversight. It orbited a dead world in unclaimed space, its modular construction allowing for rapid expansion as more ships joined the informal alliance of free traders. Marcus guided his ship through the approach pattern, noting the impressive variety of vessels already docked at the station. Sleek courier ships sat alongside massive cargo haulers, while converted military vessels displayed the scars of hard service on dangerous routes. It was exactly the kind of diverse fleet that might be able to safely transit the increasingly dangerous Andromeda Research Zone. Wandering Star, this is Haven Station Control. A voice crackled over the communications array. State your business and cargo manifest. Independent cargo hauler requesting information about convoy services to the Andromeda Zone. Marcus replied. We have legitimate research cargo that needs safe passage. There was a pause, during which Marcus imagined his ship's credentials being checked against various databases. The Free Traders Alliance was careful about who they allowed into their operations, screening out both corporate spies and outright criminals. Cleared for docking at Bay 23, Captain Chun. Welcome to Haven Station. You'll want to speak with Commander Sarah Reeves about convoy assignments. She's in the Traders' Hall on Deck 7. As they docked and secured their ship, Marcus could feel the subtle difference in atmosphere that set Haven apart from other stations in the Outer Rim. There was still tension here, the kind that came with operating in dangerous territory, but it was overlaid with a sense of mutual cooperation that was rare in these lawless regions. Stay alert, Marcus warned Kira as they prepared to disembark. This place is safer than most, but we still need to be careful about who we trust with information about the crystal. Kira adjusted her cloak and checked that the memory crystal was securely hidden beneath her clothing. Over the past few days, she had grown more confident and self-assured, the terrified slave they had rescued from Gamma Station replaced by someone who understood the magnitude of her responsibility. But the events at Meridian had reminded them both how many people were willing to kill for what she carried. The Traders' Hall was a spacious common area where independent captains gathered to share information, negotiate contracts, and plan joint operations. The atmosphere was relaxed but businesslike, with conversations in a dozen different languages creating a comfortable buzz of activity. Marcus spotted Commander Reeves immediately, a tall, auburn-haired woman in her 50s whose bearing suggested military training and whose scarred hand spoke of years spent maintaining her own ship. Captain Chun, she greeted them as they approached her table. I understand you're looking for safe passage to the Andromeda Zone. That's dangerous territory these days. What's your cargo that's worth risking the journey? Marcus had anticipated the question and prepared a carefully vague answer. Research materials for the keepers. Ancient artifacts that need expert analysis. Reeves studied him with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Artifacts from which civilization? The zone has been particularly hazardous for ships carrying certain types of ancient technology. The specificity of her question surprised Marcus. What do you know about ancient technology in the zone? Enough to know that something has the local pirates very excited and very well funded, Reeves replied grimly. In the past month, we've lost 3 ships to coordinated attacks. The raiders seem to know exactly which vessels are carrying valuable cargo, and they're willing to destroy entire crews to get their hands on specific artifacts. Kira leaned forward, her amber eyes intent. What kind of artifacts are they targeting? Anything connected to the civilization that built the deep space monitoring stations, Reeves said. The same civilization that the Keepers have been studying for decades. Someone with very deep pockets is paying premium rates for access to that technology. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The monitoring stations were part of the architect network that Kira had described, which meant their pursuers were part of a larger operation targeting all remnants of that ancient civilization. Do you know who's funding the raids? Marcus asked. Reeves shook her head. Whoever they are, they have resources that make corporate security forces look like amateurs. Military-grade ships, advanced weaponry, and intelligence networks that rival government agencies. The Free Traders Alliance has been trying to organize effective resistance, but we're outgunned and outmaneuvered. What about the convoy to the Andromeda Zone? Kira asked. Is it still feasible? We have 12 ships ready to make the run, including 2 converted military escorts, Reeves replied. It's not a guarantee of safety, but it's better odds than going alone. The question is whether you're willing to trust your fellow traders with the knowledge that you're carrying something valuable enough to kill for. Marcus considered the options. Traveling alone would be suicide, given the level of opposition they were facing. But joining the convoy meant revealing at least some details about their cargo to people they had never met. It was a risk, but perhaps a necessary one. What would you need to know about our cargo? Marcus asked carefully. Enough to plan appropriate defensive measures, Reeves said. If you're carrying something that will attract heavy attention, we need to know so we can position the escort ships accordingly. Marcus looked at Kira, who gave him a slight nod. They were going to have to trust someone eventually, and the Free Traders Alliance had a reputation for honor that was rare in the Outer Rim. We're carrying a memory crystal from the architects, Marcus said quietly, complete with someone who can interface with its contents. Reeves went very still, her eyes widening as she absorbed the implications. A functional memory crystal? With a genetic-compatible operator. She looked at Kira with new respect. Do you have any idea what you're sitting on? More than we'd like, Kira replied softly. Which is why we need to get it to the Keepers before someone else decides to take it by force. Reeves leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. That explains the increased raider activity. If word is leaked about your cargo, every mercenary and treasure hunter in the Outer Rim will be gunning for you. She paused, studying both of them carefully. It also explains why the Keepers have locked down their station. They're not just protecting their research anymore. They're protecting themselves. Can you still get us there? Marcus asked. Maybe, Reeves said slowly. But it's going to require some changes to our standard convoy protocol. We'll need to use ships that can pass for routine cargo haulers while hiding our real firepower. And we'll need to vary our route in ways that make tracking difficult. She pulled up a holographic star chart, highlighting potential routes to the Andromeda Zone. The direct route is obviously out. Too predictable, and the raiders have been hitting every ship that uses it. But there's an alternative path through the Helix Nebula that might work. It's longer and more dangerous due to stellar phenomena, but it should be harder for raiders to intercept. Marcus studied the proposed route, noting the numerous hazards marked along the way. The Helix Nebula was notorious for sensor interference and navigational anomalies, but those same factors might provide the concealment they needed. What's the timeline? Marcus asked. We can be ready to depart in 18 hours, Reeves replied. That will give us time to brief the other captains and make final preparations. But I need to warn you, once we commit to this route, there's no turning back. The convoy will be operating under strict communications silence to avoid detection. As they discussed the technical details of the convoy operation, Marcus became aware of a subtle change in the hall's atmosphere. Conversations had grown quieter, and several captains were glancing toward the main entrance with expressions of concern. He followed their gaze and saw a group of figures in expensive suits making their way through the crowd with the confidence of people accustomed to being obeyed. Corporate security, Reeves muttered, her hand moving unconsciously toward her sidearm. Haven Station is supposed to be neutral territory. The lead figure was a tall, pale human with the kind of artificial perfection that came from expensive genetic modifications. His companions were clearly bodyguards, their augmented physiques and visible weapons marking them as professional muscle. They moved with military precision, scanning the crowd for threats while their principal approached Reeves' table. "Commander Reeves," the man said in a smooth voice that carried just a hint of an accent Marcus couldn't place. "I am Director Vaughn of the Hegemony Research Consortium. I understand you're organizing a convoy to the Andromeda Zone." "Private business, Director," Reeves replied coolly. "Haven Station maintains strict confidentiality regarding trader operations." Vaughn smiled, but the expression never reached his cold blue eyes. "Of course. However, the consortium has a strong interest in ensuring the safe transport of certain archaeological materials to proper research facilities. We would be happy to provide additional security for such shipments." The offer was clearly more of a demand, and Marcus could see the tension building among the nearby traders. Haven Station's neutrality was one of its greatest assets, and corporate interference threatened the delicate balance that made it work. "The Free Traders Alliance provides its own security," Reeves said firmly. "We don't require outside assistance." Vaughn's gaze shifted to Marcus and Kira, and Marcus felt a chill as those cold eyes seemed to look right through him. "Captain Chun, I believe? And your companion must be the young lady whose recent liberation from Gamma Station has caused such a stir in certain circles." The fact that Vaughn knew their identities confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Their pursuers weren't just random criminals or opportunistic raiders. They were part of a larger organization with resources and intelligence capabilities that rivaled government agencies. "I'm afraid you have us confused with someone else," Marcus said carefully. "Perhaps," Vaughn replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "In any case, the consortium is prepared to offer very generous compensation for the safe transport of architect artifacts, much more generous than whatever arrangements you might have made with other parties." Kira spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite the obvious threat. "And if we're not interested in your compensation?" Vaughn's smile became even colder. "Then, I would strongly advise you to reconsider your travel plans. The Andromeda Zone has become quite dangerous for ships carrying valuable cargo. It would be unfortunate if your vessel encountered difficulties that could have been prevented with proper protection." The threat was barely veiled, and Marcus could see several free trader captains reaching for their weapons. The situation was rapidly escalating beyond anyone's control. But before violence could erupt, Kira stood up slowly, her hand moving to the hidden crystal beneath her shirt. As she did, every piece of electronic equipment in the hall began to flicker and pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The lights dimmed and brightened, communication devices crackled with static, and the holographic star charts wavered like images seen through water. "The artifacts you seek do not belong to your consortium," Kira said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in everyone's bones. "They belong to the galaxy itself, and those who would misuse them will find that some knowledge comes with its own protection." Vaughn's composure cracked slightly as his expensive suit's life support systems began to malfunction. His bodyguards looked around nervously as their weapons targeting systems flickered and failed. Throughout the hall, traders watched in amazement as their equipment responded to some signal beyond their understanding. "This conversation is over," Marcus said, helping Kira back to her chair as the electronic interference faded. "Commander Reeves, I believe we have convoy preparations to discuss." Vaughn stared at Kira for a long moment, clearly trying to process what he had witnessed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of grudging respect that hadn't been there before. "Very well, Captain Chun. But be aware that the consortium's patience is not infinite. There are forces at work in this galaxy that are beyond your comprehension, and artifacts like the one your companion carries are key to humanity's survival. We will have that crystal, one way or another." With that, Vaughn and his bodyguards withdrew from the hall, leaving behind a crowd of traders who were buzzing with excitement and speculation. Marcus realized that their cover was now completely blown. Every person in the hall had just witnessed a demonstration of the crystal's power. "Well," Reeves said dryly, "I guess subtlety is off the table. The good news is that every trader in this hall now has a personal stake in making sure you reach the keepers safely. The bad news is that the corporate security forces will be tracking our every move." Marcus looked around at the faces of the assembled captains, seeing determination mixed with concern. These were people who had chosen independence over corporate security, who valued freedom over profit. They understood what was at stake better than any government official or corporate executive. "When do we leave?" Marcus asked. "As soon as possible," Reeves replied, already beginning to issue orders to her fellow captains. "The hegemony won't wait long before making their next move, and we need to be deep in the nebula before they can organize a proper pursuit." As the traders began making final preparations for departure, Marcus realized that their small group had grown into something much larger. They were no longer just two fugitives carrying a dangerous secret. They had become the focal point of a conflict that would determine whether ancient knowledge would be used to protect the galaxy or exploit it. The Helix Nebula stretched across the void like a cosmic cathedral, its spiraling arms of ionized gas painted in shades of blue and gold that no human artist could have imagined. The Free Traders' convoy moved through its outer reaches with careful precision, their ship's sensors struggling to penetrate the electromagnetic interference that made the nebula both beautiful and treacherous. Marcus watched the swirling patterns of stellar phenomena from the Wandering Stars Bridge, noting how the nebula's natural radio emissions provided perfect cover for their passage. Behind them, somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, corporate security forces were undoubtedly searching for their trail. But the nebula's chaotic energy signatures would make tracking nearly impossible, buying them precious time to reach the Keeper's hidden research station. "How are you holding up?" he asked Kira, who sat in the co-pilot's chair with her eyes closed and her hands resting on the memory crystal. Over the past several days, her connection to the ancient artifact had grown stronger, allowing her to sense things that their instruments couldn't detect. "The crystal is responding to something deep within the nebula," she replied without opening her eyes. "There's another architect installation here, much larger than the monitoring station we encountered at Meridian. It's been dormant for millions of years, but it's beginning to wake up." Marcus felt a familiar chill of apprehension. Every time they thought they understood the scope of what they were dealing with, it seemed to grow larger and more complex. "What kind of installation?" "I'm not certain, but the crystal is showing me images of vast construction projects, artificial structures built into the fabric of space itself." Kira's voice carried a note of awe mixed with concern. The architects didn't just build monitoring stations, they built something much more ambitious here. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Commander Reeves aboard the convoy's lead ship. Her voice crackled with static as it fought through the nebula's interference. "All ships, we're picking up multiple contacts on long-range sensors. Corporate security forces have found our trail and are moving to intercept. Recommend we accelerate our timeline and make for the rendezvous point immediately." Marcus activated his ship's tactical displays, noting the red icons that represented pursuing vessels. The hegemony had committed significant resources to this operation, deploying at least a dozen ships, including several that showed the sensor signatures of military-grade weaponry. "They're not trying to capture us," Marcus observed grimly. "Those are attack formations." Kira opened her eyes, her amber irises glowing with an inner light that reflected the crystal's increasing activity. "They've decided that if they can't have the artifact intact, they'll settle for preventing anyone else from reaching the Keepers." The convoy began accelerating deeper into the nebula, their ships straining against the gravitational anomalies and energy fields that made navigation treacherous. The Wandering Star shuddered as she pushed through a particularly dense cloud of ionized particles, her hull heating from the electromagnetic bombardment. "Convoy lead, this is Wandering Star," Marcus transmitted. "The artifact we're carrying is reacting to something in the nebula's core. We may have a navigational advantage if we can tap into whatever the architects built here." "Explain." Reeves' voice came back, tight with concentration as she coordinated the convoy's movement. Marcus looked at Kira, who nodded her understanding. "The memory crystal contains navigation data for architect installations. If we can access it, we might be able to find safe passage through areas that would be impossible for our pursuers to follow." There was a pause as Reeves considered the risks and benefits. The nebula's core was notoriously dangerous, filled with spatial distortions and energy storms that could tear a ship apart. But it would also provide perfect concealment from corporate forces. "Do it," Reeves finally replied. "We're running out of other options." Kira removed the memory crystal from beneath her shirt, holding it up so that its pulsing light filled the bridge. As she did, the wandering star's navigation systems began to flicker and change, displaying information that shouldn't have been possible for their equipment to detect. The crystal is interfacing directly with our computers, Marcus observed in amazement. It's showing us passage routes that aren't on any star chart. On the tactical display, a safe corridor appeared through the nebula's most dangerous regions. The path wound between gravity wells and energy storms with mathematical precision, clearly designed by beings who understood stellar mechanics far better than any current galactic civilization. Convoy lead, transmitting navigation data now. Marcus sent the information to the other ships. Follow these coordinates exactly. Any deviation could be fatal. The convoy altered course, following the ancient pathway deeper into the nebula's heart. Behind them, their pursuers hesitated at the edge of the dangerous region, clearly unwilling to follow into what appeared to be certain destruction. As they moved deeper into the nebula, the space around them began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. The random swirls of gas and dust took on more organized patterns, and the background radiation shifted to frequencies that seemed almost musical. It was as if they were entering a region of space that had been deliberately shaped by intelligence beyond current understanding. Marcus, Kira's voice was filled with wonder and growing alarm. The installation we're approaching, it's not just a research station or monitoring post. It's a gateway. A gateway to where? Before Kira could answer, space itself seemed to ripple around them. The nebula's colorful gases parted like a curtain, revealing a structure that defied comprehension. It was vast beyond measurement, a crystalline construct that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space could contain. Geometric patterns shifted and flowed across its surface, creating optical illusions that hurt to look at directly. By all the gods of space, Commander Reeves' voice whispered across the communication channel. What is that thing? The Keeper's research station was a tiny speck beside the Architect installation, a collection of modular habitat domes and sensor arrays that looked like children's toys next to the alien monument. But it was clearly active, its lights twinkling with the activity of beings who had spent decades trying to understand what they had discovered. Wandering Star, this is Keeper Station Alpha. A new voice joined the communication network. I am Dr. Elon Su, Station Commander. We've been monitoring your approach and the artifact signature you carry. Permission to come aboard is granted. But I must warn you, your arrival has triggered responses from the gateway that we don't fully understand. As if summoned by the mention of its activity, the Architect installation began to pulse with increasing intensity. The geometric patterns on its surface shifted more rapidly, and the space around it seemed to bend and twist in ways that made Marcus's head ache. The crystal is resonating with the gateway, Kira said urgently. It's trying to establish a connection, but something is wrong. The protocols have been damaged by millions of years of dormancy. What happens if it connects? Marcus asked. I don't know, Kira admitted. But the crystal is showing me warnings about things that sleep in the dark between galaxies. The gateway was built to monitor those spaces, to watch for the return of something that the architects feared. The convoy docked with Keeper Station Alpha under emergency protocols, their ship's hulls groaning from the spatial distortions created by the awakening gateway. Dr. Su met them at the airlock, a distinguished woman in her 60s whose eyes held the intensity of someone who had dedicated her life to understanding the incomprehensible. The artifact you carry, the Free Traders Alliance, was about to make a stand for principles that transcended profit margins and corporate interests. And at the center of it all was a memory crystal that held secrets dating back millions of years, carried by an Etherian woman who was learning to wield powers that could change the course of galactic history. The convoy began forming up as ship after ship departed Haven Station, their various courses designed to conceal their true destination until they could rendezvous in the depths of space. The Wandering Star took her place among them, no longer alone but part of something larger, a declaration that some things were worth fighting for, and that freedom was not negotiable at any price. Behind them, corporate security forces scrambled to organize pursuit, while ahead lay the treacherous beauty of the Helix Nebula and whatever answers waited at the Keeper's hidden research station. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons, but their stubborn refusal to abandon those who needed help, even when the odds seemed impossible. It was far larger than Marcus had imagined. They weren't just carrying a valuable artifact. They were carrying a key piece of a galaxy-spanning warning system that was apparently beginning to activate after millions of years of dormancy. "We definitely need to reach the Keepers," Marcus said grimly. "This is way beyond anything we can handle alone." Kira nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I'm afraid the Keepers might not be enough either. If the monitoring network is truly activating, it means the ancient threat the architects feared might be stirring as well." As if in response to her words, long-range sensors detected something moving in the dark spaces between stars. Something vast and patient that had been waiting for just such a signal to begin its own awakening. The galaxy was about to discover that some secrets were buried for very good reasons, and that humanity's capacity for compassion might be the only thing standing between civilization and an ancient hunger that had waited eons for another chance to feed. The wandering star raced through hyperspace toward Haven Station, carrying two beings who were beginning to understand that their small act of defiance against injustice had triggered something much larger than either of them could have imagined. Behind them, Meridian Station continued to deal with the crisis unleashed by the activation of ancient technology, while ahead lay uncertainties that would test not just their courage, but the very nature of what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors. Ramonix of faster-than-light travel as she carried her two passengers toward an uncertain future. Behind them, Gamma Station continued its sordid existence, unaware that a transaction involving a drink and a desperate alien had set in motion events that would ripple across the stars. In the depths of space, ancient things stirred at the approach of secrets long buried, and the galaxy began to hold its breath without knowing why. The real journey was just beginning. But something had changed. In a universe where beings could be sold for a drink, one human had decided to prove that some things were beyond price. It was a small act of defiance in the grand scheme of galactic civilization, but sometimes small acts had a way of growing into something much larger. As the wandering star systems came online and Marcus began preparing for departure, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. But looking at Kira as she explored her new surroundings with careful curiosity, he knew he had made the right choice. The galaxy might not understand human compassion, but it was about to get a lesson in why humanity had survived and thrived despite being dismissed as primitive by more advanced civilizations. Sometimes the most important strength wasn't in weapons or technology, but in the simple recognition that every sentient being deserved dignity and choice. The wandering star lifted off from Gamma Station, carrying two souls who had found each other in the darkest corner of civilized space, and beginning a journey that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine.